Thank you everyone for joining us. This week's virtual community charla is one of the most critical and timely we've done, and we've done a lot of charlas. It's on the importance of civic engagement. I want to thank our partners, NBCUniversal Telemundo, for creating this space, which has been a priority, not just now, but for years in terms of voting and being counted by the census. Thank you, Facebook and Instagram, for supporting this effort. And everyone, please stay tuned for a very compelling feature that we're going to host with Instagram and Facebook as a follow-up to this charla. And we're coordinating around the Hispanic Heritage Awards, which are going to air on October 6th on PBS. But we're doing some very interesting things in terms of influencers that are using Instagram and Facebook in order to impact the elections and the census. We also want to thank our friends at MasterCard and the Friends of the American Latino Museum. Congratulations again to Eduardo Rodriguez and our friend Danny Vargas for their movement in terms of us having a home on the mall. And we also want to thank our hometown heroes over at Mary Center for their work. We all understand the importance of having a voice in this November's election, as well as being counted on by the census. Not only is this year's election and census the most consequential of our lifetime, as my mommy used to say, también es complicado. It is going to be complicated. It's complicated because of COVID. It's complicated because of voter and census suppression. It's complicated because of the way our country is divided. I started with a mask. This is now seen as political to try to stay healthy. Es complicado. So let's not forget that we also want to have you get an opportunity to engage these charla oradores and oradoras to ensure that our community knows the process, the rights, to understand the critical responsibility to vote in the most important elections of our lifetimes, and again, to be counted on in the census. And let's not forget that we also need to represent those important members of our communities that don't have the ability to vote. We have to represent them with our vote. This is real. And as much of you know, our virtual community charlas are here to provide a space for our community to share their personal experiences, vital information, ideas, and actions through compelling 5-minute conversations and presentations. We want to hear from our community to better serve our community. It's important to listen up, speak up, and show up for the elections and down the ballot. Please use the hashtag #CommunityCharlas. And we encourage you to use the chat box to give energy, to agree, to disagree, to check in, to provide resources and links for the entire audience. Just make sure that it's set to everyone and not just the panelists. We're grateful to the amazing lineup for today's charla. Please know their opinions are their opinions, and we're simply providing a safe and open environment to allow for them to share them with us. After the back-to-back charla presentations, we're going to see if there's enough time for a Q&A session. So please submit your questions in the Q&A window. We'll try to get to them. I just want to let you know who we have. And these are very busy people, as well as working nonstop to make sure that we're all counted on in terms of voting, in terms of the census, but yet they carved out time to spend it with you in order to share their ideas, their experiences, and their resources. So I'm just going to run down who today's speakers are: Christina, Kolbjornsen, Arturo Vargas, Christian Ramos, Zuraya, Tapia-Hadley, Juany Torres, Eduardo Sainz, Alejandra Castillo, Danny Friedman, Virginia Kase, Vanessa Cardenas, and Francis Colon. So let's get into it. With us today as our first oradora is Christina Kolbjornsen. She is a senior VP of Corporate and External Affairs for NBCUniversal Telemundo Enterprises, which is the leading media company serving 60 million Latinos living in the United States today. She oversees public affairs, corporate social responsibility, philanthropy, community engagement and partnerships, and government affairs in support of the company's vision to be the voice and choice for Latinos. That's a big job. In this role, Christina is responsible for the company's award-winning corporate social responsibility program, El Poder en Ti, The Power in You, which leverages Telemundo's fast-growing storytelling platforms to help educate millions of Latinos on critical issues and partnerships with leading nonprofits like ours, to implement programs that empower Hispanics to make positive changes in their lives and their communities. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you, Antonio. On behalf of Telemundo and my colleagues at Comcast and NBCUniversal, thank you for inviting us to be part of this charla. As you know, and you mentioned, we are just under 40 days away from the election, and all of us in the civic engagement space are working around the clock to make sure we are able to provide voters all of the information and the deadlines they could possibly need to ensure that they register and vote during this historic election. To further our commitment to the community going into this critical election year, Telemundo has developed a community campaign aimed at empowering Latinos in the areas of civic engagement. And Telemundo News, of course, is leading the way to inform our viewers and our community about the elections. So with the increased audience interested in this topic and fueled by our double-digit growth for all of our properties, Noticias Telemundo is really taking the lead together with our civic engagement campaign to make sure to share information and facts about the presidential elections and asserting Latinos' appetites for information about the candidates and, of course, the electoral process.
So, Christina, can you tell us a little bit, because I've been using this, Telemundo recently launched a study about young Latinos in the upcoming election. I am very curious about that study, because that is a big question mark right now in terms of how our young people are going to show up. And I know that our friends at Voto Latino and Mi Familia Vota are working tirelessly on that. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Of course. It's a great, thank you, Antonio. Yes, earlier this month, actually, we released an in-depth study entitled Young Latinos, A Generation of Change. In partnership with BuzzFeed News, the study examined a wide range of political and social views of one of the country's largest, fastest growing, most influential voting blocs. We focused our study on the younger Latino segment from 18 to 35 years old to help us get a sense of what actually matters to them and how they are engaging in this process and shaping American politics. So I'll share just quickly some top line findings that this study revealed and what we learned. So we know, first and foremost, hopefully this is no surprise to anyone, that young Latinos are motivated to vote for three key reasons. The coronavirus pandemics, of course, and social justice issues is really their driving force. In our study, we found that 85% of young Latinos say that issues that address racial inequality and systemic barriers are most likely to motivate them to vote. 82% of them cited that the recent Black Lives Matter protests are also motivating them to vote and go to the polls. And 71% said that the coronavirus pandemic was also a motivating factor. Very high percentage numbers right there. We also learned that young Latinos are undecided in their political affiliation. Notably, over 1/3 of them describe themselves as independent or undecided about any political party affiliation, versus half of them describing themselves as Democrat and approximately 13% of them identifying as Republican. And then finally, the third bucket is that young Latinos are making a mark. They, 3/4 of them are describing the 2020 presidential election as more important than the 2016 vote. They consider themselves informed, vocal, active, and on political and social issues, and more likely to vote than their parents. And lastly, we anticipate that they will go to the polls in unprecedented numbers based on those answers. Really great insights.
That's great. And first of all, that really gets me going in terms of those are the motivating factors, racial inequality and other issues among our youth. So I've always said we need to follow youth, not the other way around. And yes, Black Lives Matter. So Christina, Latinos will be a focused demographic in any election year, but especially important block in this year's election. I think we're all going to find out why through all the speakers, but really quickly, if you could talk a little bit about why it's more important than ever that Latinos are recognized in an important voters block, especially considering I think we're ignored every single year.
Well, yes, indeed. So we know the numbers, right? You opened with a staggering number that there are more than 60 million Latinos in the US. The US Census Bureau, according to them, more than 32 million Latinos are eligible to vote this coming year in November. And so this is essentially making them the largest ethnic minority group in the electorate. This is the first time this is happening, right? To Latinos to be the largest group. Latinos turned out to vote in the 2018 midterm elections, nearly at twice the rate as previous midterm elections. And on our end, we're focused on ensuring that we are here to help Latinos make informed decisions in this year's unprecedented elections. And that's very much where our focus has been. And you can see on the screen where our Telemundo Decision 2020 initiative has really been so vital to our community through charlas like this, but also across working with a number of our partner organizations such as yours and a number of them who are on the charla today, but also through phone banks and hosting informational gatherings, hosting conversations, and leaning into our news platform to inform and educate our Latino community as to what is happening. We are not only doing it on our air, but we are really using a multi-platform approach in ensuring that regardless of your preferred method of receiving information, that we are there and providing you with the information that you need to understand the electoral process and be educated about the information's out there.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Christina. That's a great way to get this started because it gives us a lot of context through all of that data. And thanks for that report. Like I said, I'm really energized by the fact that our community seems to be rallying behind the issues that I know are aligned with my values and I believe are American values. Let me go on to the next charla orador, who is someone that I've admired for a long time, and we follow his lead, especially when I look at the important work he's done in this space. I think has really led in this space in terms of the census reports that he puts together have been a resource guide for me, as well as his work in terms of the election. So Arturo Vargas, CEO at Naleo Educational Fund. Arturo.
Gracias, Antonio. I trust you can hear me. Yes, okay. Well, thank you for that introduction. And I have, in fact, been known for the past 30-some years as El Menso del Censo because of the obsessive focus that I have had in my career on making sure we have a complete and accurate census every 10 years. When we were ending 2019, we had our annual staff retreat of the Naleo Educational Fund team, and I shared with them what 2020 was going to represent to us as an organization, but more importantly to us as a Latino community, as the Americans that we are, that this was going to be democracy's moment in 2020. And given the organization's focus on promoting the full participation in our democracy, in fact, to perfect this democracy by ensuring every Latino participates, that this would be our moment. Well, little did we realize what 2020 was really going to involve. It has the census, it has an unprecedented important election, and it has a pandemic that is disrupting both of those. First with the census. So yesterday, a federal judge in San Jose stopped the Census Bureau from ending the collection of data on September 30th, but the Trump administration is going to appeal that. What this does is introduce a great deal of uncertainty as to what is going on and what will happen. The only thing we can be confident in is that we have to make sure every single Latino household participates in the census before September 30th. Even if the deadline is extended, it may not happen, but we have to make sure everybody is counted. The odds are immense in this census to making sure that we have as fair and accurate census as possible. And then we have an election that is, truly unprecedented in its impact. And I hate when people say this is the most important election in our lifetimes, because in fact, I believe all elections are important, but this election is unlike any other, because leading up to it, we have had experiences unlike any others. At Naleo Educational Fund, we project that 14.6 million Latinos will vote. Now, let me stress that is a floor. At least that many will vote. That's a 15% increase over the 12.7 million who voted in 2016. But let's not forget that somewhere between 30 to 32 million Latinos today are eligible to vote because they're citizens 18 years age and over. We have a great deal of work to do to close that performance gap between those who can vote and those who do vote. And we're very concerned about the impact that COVID-19 will have on electoral participation. It already has disrupted the census and census participation, and we want to and need to address how it may affect electoral participation. Registration has been affected. Many people would register to vote at DMVs and other agencies. They have been closed. Many people's lives have been completely disrupted by infection rates, hospitalization rates, death rates, the impact by the economic hit it has brought our families. And it's very hard to break through that noise and convince folks to fill out a census form or to go vote. But we have no choice. We have to do all we can in order to ensure everybody participates. At Naleo Educational Fund with Latino Decisions, we are conducting a tracking poll for the 9 weeks leading up to Election Day. We are surveying 400 Latino registered voters every week, 400 different voters every week, asking them for their candidate preferences, what's important to them in this election, and their likelihood to vote. And much of it mirrors exactly what Christina just shared from the Telemundo study. Some 75% of Latino registered voters say they will absolutely vote in this election. And the most important issue to them right now is COVID-19, followed by the economy, followed by healthcare, and then the other issues important to our community. And it's not surprising to me that COVID-19 would be the #1 issue, given how it has been affecting the Latino community. So this is democracy's moment. This is our moment at Naleo as an organization. And it's a moment for all of us to come together to ensure that we have a full voice in our democracy through participation in the census and through voting in this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Arturo, and thank you for your leadership. Next up is Kristian Ramos, who is the founder and CEO of Autonomy Strategies. His presentation is called The Latino Vote in 2020, The Glass is Half Full. He's also an influencer in media, from MSNBC to Huffington Post to The Atlantic to Fox News. Kristian, give us your take.
And Arturo, thank you so much for all of that data that you just gave, and for the other presenters. Look, I want to start with optimism, right? I want to start and sort of take this from the perspective that the glass is half full. Things are going about as well as they could be right now in our democracy, right? In the middle of a pandemic and everything else that's going on. But the reason I say that is, look, I agree with Arturo that this is about our democracy, but I would frame it slightly differently. This is about your friends, your neighbors, your mothers, your families. This is about your communities. This election is about America. It is about the soul of our nation, to borrow that phrase, but it's so much more than that, right? And when I say I am optimistic, when I look out at our country, I see people who are marching in the street peacefully. I hear people who are standing up for their neighbors and their friends, and I see people who care about our country desperately. There is a lot of bad things that are happening, but I am also seeing a lot of good things, and I'm very hopeful about that. And I hope that anybody who's watching here today is inspired by what they see and hear from their friends, their neighbors, from the elderly, and from the young. And so I want to start there because I think it's very important for the rest of this conversation that we're going to have, because those are the things that are going well. When we're talking about the Latino community, there are some things that we definitely need to figure out and we need to work harder on. 64% of Latinos this cycle have not heard from either political party. 64% in 2020 in an election of this magnitude. That's scary, right? And I'm so grateful for organizations like Mi Familia Vota, for Voto Latino, for all of these people who are doing this work, but I don't understand how 64% of our community has not been reached out to by either political party. And then the other thing that the polling and the data shows us is that there's a lot of ambivalence within the Latino community around voting this cycle. We have every reason in the world to be engaged. We have every reason in the world to be out and voting. And I think we are eventually going to get there. But the polling is pretty stark. 40% of Latino voters in Arizona ambivalent about voting. 37% of voters in Nevada ambivalent about voting. 36% in Michigan. 32% in Wisconsin. And so the disconnect, I would argue, is not that people are engaged. It's not that people aren't noticing or don't care, because I see people caring. I see people marching in the streets. I see this incredible like urge and desire for people to participate. I think we need to fundamentally think about how we are talking to the Latino community about engaging in our elections and our electoral process. And I think we also fundamentally need to think about where we are speaking to these voters. And these two things are connected, right? Comcast, Telemundo, I think probably understands this better than anybody. Christina probably understands this better than anybody. Our community is digital, and our community is out in their neighborhoods, and they're everywhere. And the thing that links them, right? You used to talk about online digital organizing. You take people online to offline, right? Now everybody is online. There is no more going between the two. I have this phone here that I take with me everywhere. That's my daughter, who I love more than anything in the world. During the day, I watch YouTube videos with my daughter. I get political advertisements on there sometimes. I get advertisements aimed at me from there, you know? That is a key component to doing this, right? Everybody has internet-enabled televisions. Everybody has cut the cord in some cases, and so how are we reaching those voters? And I would argue that the other thing that we really need to figure out in terms of speaking to this community, I've just given you the where, and I'm going to give you the what now. It's got to be optimistic. It's got to be positive. We've got to give these voters a reason to show up and vote, and that reason is not necessarily just democracy. It's their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their cousins, their neighbors. And so I think if we're having this conversation in an optimistic way about the future of our country and the greatness of our country and how we can together, you know, achieve something better, how we can continue to be that shining beacon on the hill, I think people will be less ambivalent about participating because they'll see themselves represented in there. And so I just wanted to say thank you, Tony, for having me here again, and Christina and Arturo for all this incredible data and information. And if you take nothing else from this presentation, the glass is half full. I think we're going to get there. I think we're going to see record level turnout from the Latino community this cycle. And I'm really, really excited and glad to be here today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kristian. I'm still trying to figure it out, though. The glass is half full, but 60% of Latinos weren't reached out to, and 40% are ambivalent. But I'm sure that it'll all turn around and it'll end up being okay. So next up, we want to have Zuraya Tapia-Hadley, who is Manager of Public Policy at Facebook, Social Media and Civic Engagement. And Zuraya, let's hear it.
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with such a great crowd and distinguished folks that are also, in many cases here, good friends. Thanks again, and thanks for the topic, Tony, and for getting us together. As always, you get us together in the most crucial moments on the most crucial issues. So, gracias, amigo. The glass half full. I want to share one stat that I think is indicative of that and why we have to work so hard and what's at stake, right? If you take the mode of age, so the average age, the age that is the most frequent among different demographics, the mode, the most common age in the general white population is 58 years old right now. Among people of color, it's 27. Among Latinos, it's 11 years old, right? That's our population. We in this group know that we are the present and the future of this country. And I love that Tony always tells the young Latino leaders, you are not the future you were today, you are now. It's never been more true, Tony. These kids are defining our country, and that gives me hope. At the same time, it gives us a huge sense of responsibility of how we need to bring up this next generation. As the mother of 2 young boys, to make sure that they're engaged, and how we need to continue to reach out and branch out to young people, which takes me to my day job, right? Social media and Facebook. We've undergone a number of changes in the last few years, understanding that there's a lot of challenges, but the glass is half full, because if you can take a monolith like this company that still has a long way to go to be more and more diverse, but if you can make a company like ours, our company cares about this issue like so many others. They're seeing the need for it. And for example, Facebook has shifted policies and updated policies in the last few years. Understanding that it's not just about taking down misinformation. In that sense, policies have changed, making them more strict, including census and voter suppression, voter engagement policies. For example, any either political ad or content that intends to mislead or to discourage either the census participation or discourage voting, that comes down, right? So they are much harder line policies than others that we have. That's that's recent, not too recent, but it's relatively new. So that's, I think, a step in the right direction. Additionally, it's not just to put down the misinfo, but also get the right information out. We are, as you all know, I think most of us are going to be on Facebook or Instagram. It's a great source of information for many. So we've taken it upon ourselves to have a responsibility to get the right information out on both census and voting. So back during Census Day in April, we launched our census center of sorts, which it's a hub with accurate census information in which we worked in partnership with the Census Bureau. And we had some quick promotions on that, right? So trying to literally put it in people's hands. So again, we don't have the stats that Kristian mentioned. We're hoping, and which is what I really want to hope folks take away from this call. You go on and that you use it, and then you show it to other people, right? Because it's right there on top in the bookmarks in your either Facebook or Instagram. It'll be popping up as reminders, so that you'll get questions like, are you registered to vote? If you are, do you know how you're voting, or your plan to vote? To encourage others to vote, you can share it with your friends, with your family, to remind them to be sure that they're registered. So all this to say that hub also takes you to your local election authority. So you don't need to be depending on any other sources, media or blogs or anyone else, but you can go straight to the sources to when am I voting? How can I vote? All the details. If you're overseas, if you are in the military and you want information on how to vote there, if you want to be a poll worker, all that information is concentrated in one place. So I just want to highlight, thank you for the opportunity, Tony, to highlight this, because I just think it's super important that folks know that it's literally right in your hand. Actually, WhatsApp is also going to be talking about this with a slogan called "El poder está en tus manos," right? So we're having this also in Spanish language, which I think is hugely important. And the Voter Information Center is available in a number of languages, including Spanish. And lastly, I just think it's so great that during now, this time, this month, and generally, I think on our channels and others, you're seeing our culture and our voice highlighted increasingly, right? Tony and the Hispanic Heritage Foundation has been a great partner in this. We have the Yosoya Award coming up, and we just have more of these opportunities and occasions to showcase our voices and showcase Latino creators in new and different ways, and now increasingly digital creators. So I just think that's very exciting, and let's try to leverage that too, and leverage those artists, entertainers to help us get the voice out, get the word out as well, and make sure people know that our vote really is our voice. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Zuraya. I'm getting more and more optimistic. That was interesting. Kristian like brought me in excited. I got a little depressed, and then I got excited again, and then you followed up. That's the way we do it. Next up is my hermanita holding it down in San Antonio, Juany Torres, who's a community organizer, Bexar County Census Complete Count Committee, Civic Engagement in Texas, and her program is called Civic Engagement in Texas, From the Census to Voting. Do it, Juany.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Buenas tardes a todos. Feliz viernes. I am so excited to join you all to talk both about the census, but also about civic engagement through a new project I'm part of called She Se Puede. So I'm going to start off, first things first, the census. I know just last night there is breaking news that now we might have a few more days, another month for the census. I just wanted to assure everybody, no matter what, take it today. I'm going to post the link both in Spanish and in English in the chat, so that we can go ahead and take a few minutes and just get this done. You know, our community has so much to lose if we do not get counted, because our community is growing in rapid numbers all over the map. And so the census is important in letting us know in federal dollars how much money goes to each community. So that's the English link I just posted in the chat. I'm about to post the Spanish one. To tell you a little bit about my role in this, I was appointed by the mayor and county judge in San Antonio, Texas, to be part of the Complete Count Committee. And in that role, I have been responsible for over a year in making sure that all the kids in Bexar County and San Antonio under 5 are counted. Why this population? Well, it's actually one of the most undercounted, because people sometimes forget that their babies count too in the census. So when you are asked about your household and how many family members you have, as well as yourself, folks forget that if a baby, even if they were just born, they count. They are another head in your household that is supposed to get money from the census and count as an individual in regards to the population changes, demographic changes in your community. So again, I just posted the English link as well as the Spanish one. And if I can take just a couple minutes to say, en español, el census cuenta porque usted cuenta, nuestras familias cuentan. Si no contamos, si no llenamos el censo, vamos a agarrar menos dinero para nuestra comunidad. Así que es muy importante que tomemos algunos minutos, hagamos clic en el link que está aquí en el chat y llenemos el censo. En menos de 5 minutos, ponga cuánta gente vive en su familia. Nadie va a tener acceso a esa información. Así que tome unos minutos y hágalo hoy. All right, so I want to switch gears really quickly to talk about She Se Puede. So I'm the digital organizing director for a new project called She Se Puede. And this She Se Puede is meant to be a community to empower and uplift Latinas. It's a community by Latinas for Latinas. And something really cool that we just launched is the She Se Puede Power Squad. This Power Squad is going to be responsible for helping us turn out the vote amongst Latinas. We are a nonpartisan organization. We do not take hold of either political party. We just care about our Latinas being out there, raising our voices, making sure we're heard both outside the ballot box and inside the ballot box. And so we just launched our She Se Puede Power Squad application. I'm going to actually put that in the chat too, so that anybody that is interested in taking leadership and joining us for the She Se Puede Power Squad can apply. So that link is there in the chat. And then lastly, of course, all states matter in the election, every single state, no matter what you hear from the pundits, all Americans that can vote this November need to be registered to vote, and many before October 5th. So I'm going to post here the link where you can register to vote today. Again, only a few minutes. You can narrow down by state. Go ahead and fill out your information, get registered to vote. Latinas, you know we are the backbones of our families in so many ways, of our communities. We take on the toll of so many different responsibilities and so many different people. Our voices need to be centered, our needs need to be centered, our leadership needs to be centered. And the way to do that is by registering to vote. Now, let's be mindful that so many of our families are mixed status. You know, we have undocumented family members, primos, primas, abuelitas. We also have maybe resident, right? Folks that have green cards that can vote. They can still be involved. You can help, we can help equip everybody with the best information possible, hotline numbers to voter protection, making sure that we are all aware of our rights and that we are all protected, especially as the election nears. So again, the links are in the chat. Apply for the Power Squad with Si Se Puede. Register to vote today, especially before the October 5th deadline that is true for many states across the country, and get counted in the census both in Espanol and in English. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Juany. Keep up the good work. And I am going to click on that link right now because I need to make sure that I get it going. But the only way that every vote counts, by the way, is if we have a different electoral system, and which we need in terms of the popular vote. However, we do need to be counted on. So next up is Eduardo Sainz, the Arizona State Director at Mi Familia Vota. He is doing a presentation called Building Latino Political Power. Eduardo.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody at for inviting us and to be part of this great panel. I'm very excited. Just wanted to share a little bit of the story of Mi Familia Vota. Mi Familia Vota was started to build Latino political power in California. We started with the vision out of ensuring that our community had power and that we could have better policies for our community. Proposition 187 in California got us started where we were trying to register as many Latinos as we could, getting individuals out to the polls. But unfortunately, it was something that happened in that truly damaged our community. Since then, we started to expand our work to different states. And one of those states is Arizona, my home state. And history tends to repeat itself, unfortunately, sometimes. And in 2010, Mi Familia Vota and went into the state of Arizona, and we were seeing that the history of California was repeating it. It was getting repeated here in Arizona because of SB 1070. And we were able to see Arizona as a place of being the epicentric of hate, where we were talking about and looking at being the place where we are asking individuals to show their papers no matter what. And we decided to come together with local groups and formate organizations that with one mission of building that political power to ensure that we could elect individuals that align with our values. And since then, we started our 15-year strategy to make sure that Latinos are registered to vote on the PEBL, which is the permanent early voting list in Arizona, basically voting by mail. And right now, close to 80% of the electorate in Arizona votes by mail. And that's how we have been able to see a lot of wins in Arizona and a lot of record turnout among Latinos, among women, among young individuals. And we have been able to see so many victories from 2016 to today. We have also been able to tap into our community's fears. SB 1070 brought a lot of tears to our community, but it also brought a lot of unity to ensure that we could move forward. And by that moving forward, we started to organize and do advocacy work around immigration, border protection, border education, and border mobilization. We knew that there was a lot of intimidation at the polls, and by ensuring that voters could be voting from the comfort of their home, it would lead to record turnout among our communities. We have been able to see how our voter treatment has been able to transform low propensity voters into high propensity voters, voters that want to get engaged, voters that want to make sure that they're also engaging their family members, that they're engaging their friends, neighbors, etc., into participating in democracy. And it's not only engagement for the elections, it's also engagement with our elected officials after November. our work has highlighted our voter engagement work, our citizenship work, making sure that everybody is registered, making sure that people vote by mail, ensuring that individuals make a vote plan, and ensure that all support workers are competitive and are bilingual, that they're not intimidating our folks at the polls. Connecting the issues that our community cares into ensuring that that also motivates them in electing individuals that align with our values. We have been able to see the voter outreach from millions of calls that we have been able to make on this cycle, text messages, our digital engagement, launching a national hotline, doing peer-to-peer engagement. And this year has been a unique year because of COVID. And COVID has also challenged us to many organizations to get outside of our comfort zone and test and get creative, and provided an avenue of support and continue to have those relationships with our voters. Our voters right now, most of Arizona voters are going through hard times because of COVID. They feel like they're failing their kids because they don't have access to quality high-speed internet or a simple computer. There's only one computer in the household that is limiting individuals from thriving in this country. And they know that that has been because of the lack of investment that the elected officials have been making into our communities, and they're fed up and want to make sure that we see change. That has also led to campaigns like the most aggressive campaign that we have launched, Mi Familia Vota, for the Basta Trump campaign, ensuring that our efforts are looking into getting an individual out of elected office. We have seen many victories in Arizona. People keep asking, when is the Latino vote going to show up? I can tell you in Arizona, we've been working and flipping the state for the last 10 years. We have looking into local victories from getting the face of show me your paper laws out of office. Joe Arpaio, we took him out in 2016. We were able to pass one of the most progressive minimum wage increases in 2016, elect the first woman to serve in the US Senate for the Arizona delegation, elect the first Latina to serve as mayor of Tucson, and we were able to look at record turnout for the 2020 primary election in the middle of a pandemic of our voters wanting to participate. We want to make sure that we continue to ramp our work and our community is ready, but we need to make sure that we're investing back in them to ensure that we can win and center the issues that we care as a community. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you for your work. Next up is my very good friend. We've been friends for over 25 years. I feel like I grew up with her professionally and in the community. She's the CEO at the YWCA, which is 2.2 million girls and women. And before then, she's had an illustrious career in government, but always in a position of service. Alejandra Castillo, her presentation is Your Voice, Your Vote, Your Future, hashtag YWomenCount and YWomenVote. Alejandra.
Thank you, Tony. And I would love to, we've had so much information, but I'd love to turn your attention to a quick PSA, if you will, so that we can just get this conversation, this portion of the conversation started. So if we can start the PSA, that would be great.
Do you want to go first?
Who starts? Why do you vote, Mama?
I vote because it's really important that my voice is heard.
It is a privilege that my great-grandmother and her mother did not have.
If I'm not voting, then no one's thinking about my issues.
Access to health care, police violence, immigration reform,
environmental issues, access to affordable housing,
gendered violence against women, queer, trans, and non-binary people of color.
All these policies personally affect me.
I am so inspired by this young, beautiful lady sitting next to me because she is informed.
I look at women like her, and they were the ones who taught me to speak up for myself.
We're beginning to see that we do make a difference. Voting is the way to do it.
Every woman, please vote for yourself and for your sisters.
YWCA is on a mission to eliminate racism and empower women.
Tu voz, tu voto, tu futuro.
Your voice,
your vote, your future.
Thank you, Tony. And I actually want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk amongst friend and amongst familia. Buenas tardes. At the end of the day, I want to remain as optimistic as my previous panelist, but I also want to make sure that we remain realistic. And what I mean by that is that right now we are being attacked under multiple crises. Not only the pandemic, the economic crises, the call for racial justice, an environmental crisis as we see the fires on the West Coast, a crisis of trust, and a crisis of leadership. So as organizations that have stood the test of time, YWCA is 162-year-old. But we join together with our colleagues from the League of Women Voters, with Hispanic Heritage Foundation, with Mi Familia Vota, because we want to make sure that not only do we get information, but we get information that we can trust. And at this point in time, I will tell you that we are under some level of siege. You know, I grew up in the Dominican Republic as a teenager, and I remember distinctly what it meant to have elections where the outcome was uncertain and the fear was growing. And right now, if you hear the news, that's what's at stake. So many things are at stake for the Latino community. Our issues are issues of America. Let there be no doubt. Our issues are economic issues. Our issues are environmental issues, issues of environmental justice, issues of education, of opportunity, of democracy. So I want to make sure that as we talk about getting ready to vote and planning our vote, making sure that either we decide to vote by mail, or however we decide to vote, that we are going to not only drag ourselves out, but drag our families and those who can vote, and to make sure that our voices are elevated. I just had an interactive map here, and at some point later you can see it. But YWCA is we serve over 1,300 communities, large and small. And I also want to draw your attention on the fact that there are some narratives that we have to tear down. The narrative that our issues are only immigration issues, we got to tear that down. Important issues, yes, absolutely. Immigration is critical. But we are also concerned about everything that's happening to our country. Narratives that we only live in certain places of the country. Narratives that we are only in urban areas. We are also in suburban and rural areas. We are in blue states and red states, and they intertwine in so many different ways. So I'm appealing that we become not only informed, but discerning consumers of that information, that we know how we process that information so that we can understand what's in the best interest of our communities. And I want to stop here because everyone has said pretty much everything that I would have wanted to highlight. I just want to underscore that we are all in communities that really need our voices. There are elections happening every single year in this country. Everything from school boards to sheriffs to judges to elected offices at the local level, state level, and federal level. I just want to make sure that our community is well represented because we all know what's at stake and that we will all show up. So I will leave it here. I don't need to show the last video, but I want to thank Hispanic Heritage Foundations. You always not only know how to bring us together, but you also know how to push the envelope and have the tough conversations. And this is a moment of reckoning. So thank you, Tony, for inviting me.
Thank you, Alejandra. Next up is Managing Director at Voto Latino, who we have counted on for many years. And Maria Teresa is like a cousin to our organization and to me. So I want to make sure that we welcome Danny Friedman, and he is going to present civic engagement resources.
Hi, buenas tardes, everybody. It's true, I'm not Maria Teresa, but I do my best to do my best impression of her whenever I'm in a group conversation like this. My name is Danny Friedman. I'm a managing director of Voto Latino. I use he, him, el pronouns. And as an organization at Voto Latino, we do a lot of things, but I want to talk about our work for voters and what you all can do to help. and the work that we've done on the census. So as a digital first organization, we've been continuing to help register Latino voters around the country. Despite COVID, we've been able to really bring out our community. And up to today, we've registered more than 315,000 voters in critical states like Texas, Pennsylvania, Florida, Arizona, et cetera. And that's been because of some of the things that other folks mentioned, the fact that our community is on the phone. It's on using social media and other technology to consume all of this information. So we do our best to reach young Latinos where they are. A little bit about the younger Latinos. Pew came out with a report, I think yesterday, that with some analysis that showed that the Generation Z, so this is the group younger than millennials, I'm a millennial, I'm not in Generation Z, that it's 22% Latino, which is huge. It's the largest group of Latinos in a particular generation that makes up that group of voters. And so Generation Z is going to have a big impact on this election. There's another point that I think is really critical. In 9 states, the numbers of Latinos who are Generation Z is greater than the margin by which either presidential candidate won in 2016. So in 3 states, Nevada, New Mexico, and New Hampshire, Hillary Clinton won. In Arizona, Texas, Wisconsin, Florida, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, President Trump won. So to say that our community is important is not just an understatement. It's that people running for office ignore younger Latino voters at their peril. So we do our best to create great learning and opportunities for young Latinos to get into civic engagement, whether that is by inviting them to take the census, by asking them to register to vote, by following our social media. I wasn't going to show it in this presentation due to time, but we put out a fun video called "Wash Your Hands and Take the Census" on YouTube. I'll drop the link in the webinar chat to encourage our community to take the census. As we're focused on empowering young Latinos to access their power, on October 2nd, we're actually hosting a virtual event called Power Summit. Normally, Power Summit is a hot ticket get-together with Latino activists from around the country, typically held in Austin, Texas. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it in person this year, but we are doing it virtually next Friday. So I'll share the invitation with you all. A lot of folks have said good things about the census, but thank goodness that the timing has been extended. We've been working very hard to reach those hard to count and hard to reach communities, especially in places like Texas along the southern border, where those communities are really undercounted and underserved by our government. So to echo the optimism of our fellow panelists here, these young voters are excited, they're motivated, and we're helping them get registered. So thanks for the opportunity, and I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Danny. Next up is somebody that I long admire. We honored her alongside of Alejandra Castillo with our Leadership Award at the Hispanic Heritage Awards last year, on stage at the Kennedy Center and on the PBS program. Please welcome someone that leads a historic organization that was started after women's suffrage, when women were allowed to vote 100 years ago. But as she always says, white women were allowed to vote. All the other women weren't allowed to vote until the 60s. So let me bring up CEO at the League of Women Voters of the United States, and her presentation will be Civic Engagement Resources, Virginia Kase. Let's hear it, hermana.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Tony, so much, hermano. I appreciate you for just doing everything that you're doing. And thank you to all my friends here on this webinar. Thank you for everybody for joining. Okay, so we hear a lot of information today, and I want to take all of that information and help put it into some context so that you know exactly what you need to be doing. I also want to apologize because I live in DC and sirens are running by my house, and so excuse me. What you see here on the screen is our voter education website. It's called vote411.org. We also partner with NALEO to provide all of this information in Spanish. So this is one of our wonderful partnerships that we have so that everybody can have all of the information they need. But I want to back up for a second and just remind everybody, Latinos have power. I need to emphasize that because we hear a lot of doom and gloom. There are 32 million eligible Latino voters in the United States. Not all of them are registered. Not all of them are going to go out to the polls. So that is your number one job today. And I'm going to teach you what you need to do to make sure that you can get as many people engaged as possible. But again, walk away with today knowing nothing else, but there is a lot of power on this call. There is a lot of power in our community, and we just need to harness it and own it because Latinos can be the deal breaker for this election. Latinos can turn this election. We are currently one of the largest voting blocks if we really harnessed our power. So just think about that for a second. So I want to go back to Vote 411. I need everybody to make sure that they are, for themselves first, going to Vote 411. People talk about creating a voting plan, but what does that actually mean? So when you go to Vote 411, you're going to be able to type in your address. All of the information that you need is going to be right there. It's going to tell you who's on your ballot. What are the ballot measures? You're going to be able to find out if you're registered to vote already, so you can check your voter registration status, or you can find out how you register to vote. It'll connect you to the sources you need to be able to register to vote. You're going to be able to research your candidates, all of the issues that you need to know, because at the end of the day, this is not an election that's just about Donald Trump and Joe Biden, who's going to be president. Everything is on the ballot. All of your local decision makers. Who's making decisions about your Board of Education? Who's making decisions about the roads and bridges in your communities? Who's making decisions about things that impact your daily life? Who your judges are? We have concerns about criminal justice reform. You want to change those judges because they're not sentencing people fairly. Those are the types of issues that also really matter to our communities. So making sure that we're looking at the complete ballot. And then there's other things sometimes like, is there a bond issue on your ballot? A lot of times we don't even know, what is this bond issue? Why should I vote for it? It's going to have all of the information you need there. So we want to make sure that people have what they need to make an informed vote. And also because it helps us to combat mis and disinformation. There's a lot of mis and disinformation out there that's being circulated on the internet, and people don't know who to trust. So what we get on here on Vote 411 is information you can trust, nonpartisan voter information that gives you the facts and allows you to make a decision without trying to steer you in one direction or the other. The other thing you're going to be able to do there is find out about candidate debates and forums. Some people really want to be able to find out what's going on in their information, hear from the candidates in their own words. So you'll be able to do that also. And then the other thing we want to make sure everybody does is once you go through that process, you find all the information, you can click through and we'll actually send you an email or text you a copy of the choices that you made for your ballot. That'll give you where you're supposed to go. That way you have it when you show up on voting day, if that's your plan, or whether you're voting by mail, if that's your plan, you have all the information already. You don't need to be flip-flopping back and forth. So it's really important that you have the plan for your vote, and that's really how you do it, making sure that all the information is in one place. Now, deciding how to vote. Do you want to vote by mail? A lot of our folks say, I don't trust it, I'm concerned, I've heard all of these things about the post office, so that might not be an option for them. We just want to remind people that if you do vote by mail, and it's safe, and if you do it early enough and you request your ballot in time, you will be able to have your ballot counted. We also want to make sure for those people who say, hey, I'm not sure I want to do it in person. plan to show up in person, but also make sure that the day you're going to vote, whether it's voting early or on November 3rd, that you're checking your polling location. Because of COVID, we found in the primaries that sometimes polling locations changed. So we want to make sure that everybody is going the day they're going to vote to make sure their polling location has not changed and they're going to the right place. And then, like, my family is from Puerto Rico. I like to say, you know, let's have a parranda to the polls. Let's make it happy, right? So we want to make sure that we're bringing as many people with us, make sure your entire family has a plan. And if you decide to vote in person, there are going to be long lines. There's no doubt about it. Make sure, wear comfortable clothes, bring your snacks, bring your water. If you need to bring a chair, pretend you're going to the beach. Just make sure that you are going to be as comfortable as you can be when you go to vote. And then also bring your PPE with you. And if you have extra masks, bring one for your neighbor who doesn't want to wear one or maybe can't afford to buy one. But making sure that you have the personal protection equipment that you need to be able to vote safely is really, really important. And then the one thing I will say is, once you've gone through all of this, you have your plan, you've made your decisions, then you need to work with other folks to help them create their plan. Make this a party. Make sure that you are bringing everybody with you and remind them that even if you haven't made up your mind, it's okay to make up your mind at the last minute. If you don't like either of the candidates, it's okay. Pick the one that you think is the less of the two that are terrible to you. Whatever the motivating factor is for people, you need to help figure out what that is. And then I would say, we also still have, we are partnering with Power the Polls, as are many other organizations. There is still a critical shortage of poll workers. So once you've made your voting plan, you know exactly what you're going to do, go to Power the Polls. I'll put the link in here, go to the Power the Polls. And once you go there, you can sign up to be a poll worker in your community. It's paid, they'll have all of the PPE, there's plenty of training. It is the most important job anybody can do this election season, especially in our communities where there aren't a lot of bilingual people who are signing up for the polls. So this is so critical that we have bilingual workers, people who make sure that our folks have the information that they need. And then the last thing I would say is repeat. Do this again with your neighbors. Do this with your friends. Do this with everybody that you know to make sure that everybody has the information that they need. And then the last thing I want to say, because I know I need to make it quick, we only get 5 minutes. But if you engage issues when you're at the poll, if you witness voter suppression, we have resources for that as well. Go to 866-OUR-VOTE. That's the voter protection hotline. You can report what's happening so that we can make sure that the league, all of our partners who are part of the Voter Protection Coalition, we have attorneys on standby. We have people who are monitoring the polls. We want to make sure that nobody feels intimidated. Nobody is seeing barriers on the day that they go to vote. So make sure 866-OUR-VOTE is the other number that is really important to report those things. And then making sure that if you do run into troubles, not only reporting that to 866-OUR-VOTE so the coalition can dispatch the necessary people to make sure that we're investigating what's happening. Last but not least, don't walk away without casting a provisional ballot. You have the right to cast a provisional ballot. So if they say, oh, we can't find your information here, it looks like you're not registered. No, I'd like a provisional ballot. Make sure that your voice is heard, because if nothing else, you have the right to do that. And again, I just want to remind everybody, this is about power. This is about harnessing the power of the Latino community and showing this country what is possible if we use our vote and our voice. I want to thank you all. Tony, thank you so much. I love voting. I love this voting season. Yes, there are lots of trouble, but there are things that we can overcome. We have overcome so much more in this country, and I am certain that we will overcome the barriers this election, but it requires all of us to do our part. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Virginia. I appreciate all of those resources, especially the 800 number or 866 number that we can call. There's somebody I'm thinking about that I'd like to report at a very top level that I think is conducting voter suppression. So let me move on. Next up is Vanessa Cardenas, who is Senior Advisor at the League of Latin American Citizens, LULAC. And she's going to share with us her personal experience. They're very good friends of ours, and we partnered with LULAC on the Charla 2 weeks ago. So Vanessa?
Great. Thank you so much, Antonio, for that kind introduction. And the very first thing I want to do is just thank our friends of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation for organizing this session. And I really want to thank everyone who's watching. Thank you for giving us the time and listening to us. I know that there's a lot of information here that's shared. And for those of you who don't know LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens is the largest and oldest Latino civil rights organization in the United States. We have over 140,000 members nationwide, 1,000 in the United States and Puerto Rico. And LULAC has always stood with the Latino community and fought for our rights. And I just want to underscore what the previous speakers have said. This election is so important for us. It is going to define not just the next 4 years, but truly our future when it comes to issues like climate change, immigration, education, and so on and so forth. I don't have to tell you guys, but as you know, we are the largest and fastest growing community in the United States. We are the second largest population in the United States. For the first time, we are going to be the second largest voting bloc in the United States. And what that means is that we are the future. We are the future of this country. And I think the big challenge for us is how to really harness the numbers that we have, the talents that we have, the opportunities that we represent, and really apply our involvement and our pressure to just really be part of the American story and sort of the American future, and just be part of the American story in everything that it means. I'm sure that folks have already mentioned the fact that even though we have these numbers, many of our folks do not participate in the voting process. And that's a huge challenge. Only about half of Latino eligible voters actually vote. And while in the last couple of elections, we've actually had record turnout, we can always do so much more. And if you think about that, you know, how much different our country could be if we had more Latino voters in Arizona, in Texas, in Florida. We would really change things around, not just in those states, but throughout our nation. So our role is really crucial this year. And as other speakers have mentioned, a lot is on the table. It's about, again, about our future when it comes to education issues, when it comes to climate change issues, which, as you know, it's a key issue for our young people. And not just that, right? Right now we're going through so much social unrest and questions around just discrimination and racism. And I know that our young folks are really very worried about what that means for our country moving forward. But most importantly, they're really hungry for policy solutions that are going to address this long-standing disadvantage and obstacles that not just African Americans, but also Latinos and other people of color, indigenous included, have had. So it's a really, I think, important moment for us to define the next 4 years. And I think that our role, it's not just about defending our community, because that's part of it, but it's also about empowering our community. And in that perspective, again, we have so much to do, in particular Latinas, given sort of the role that they have in our homes and our communities. They are such a rock in our communities, in our families, and they really have a very important voice to just really help our folks organize and mobilize. So I really want to shout out to our Latinas that are watching, and I'm sure that you guys have heard of the effort that Stephanie Valencia and others have launched a couple of weeks ago with the effort around She Se Puede. And I invite you to also visit that website to learn more about that. And I think Juany was earlier on, so she also spoke about that. So anyway, so all of that, so what can you do? I think that, again, our speakers have laid out a number of resources, but I think for me, there are a couple of things that are really important to do this year. The first one is, as you all know, Latinos are being targeted again and again when it comes to disinformation. We are being targeted with crazy theories, crazy conspiracy theories, crazy messages, scary messages around voting and the election in our democracy. I think it's really important for us to always go to credible sources in our community. It's really important to do that, just to make sure that we're having the correct information. The second thing, it's really important not to amplify disinformation, even if we want to debunk it. I think one of the reactions that we have when we see something online that's not true, we want to comment and say that's not true. But by doing that, we're actually rewarding the post, and because of the social media platforms algorithms, that actually makes it spread even more. So it's really important to take care of what our community is getting, not to amplify those messages that we're seeing online. But also, I think one of the important things to do when we're faced with this information is to really make sure that we are amplifying positive messages and empowering messages of our community. You've heard some of those already. Talk about accurate information about voting and how flexible it is, and the correct dates and the correct process so that people have that information. Talk about your aspirations for our nation moving forward. Talk about the fact that, you know, voting is something that's sacred, that every community needs to participate. So again, the point here is to really remind our community that we have a stake in this election, that we have to participate, that participate is accessible, and that we as a community need to show up and make sure that our voices are being heard, that our votes are being counted. So that's one piece on the disinformation piece that I know it's something that's really troubling right now in our community. The second thing that I think is important for us to do in the next few days, and truly this is in the next few days, is, as you all know, we're in a conversation about the next Supreme Court Justice nomination. And it is so important that we all communicate to our senators that no one should be nominated before we know who's our president and before Inauguration Day. The Supreme Court has an incredible influence on every aspect of our nation. They are the last word when it comes to issues of healthcare, LGBTQ rights, issues regarding women's right to choose, and of course, immigration and refugees. And the court has been an incredible asset and an incredible check in our government these last 4 years. And we, members of our society, we have to make sure that we are communicator to our Senate, that we have to have the election first before we have a nomination and a justice.
Thank you,
the
Vanessa.
last thing I would say is that, again, make a plan to vote and make sure you're participating in this year's elections.
Thank you, Vanessa. Next up is Frances Colon, that's going to close us out. She is the Latino Vote State Director, Florida for All Coalition. She's going to talk about the Latino vote in Florida, which is critical right now in these elections. And I also want to mention that Frances received our Inspiro Award when she was at the State Department years ago, also representing Puerto Rico and the diaspora. So, Frances, let's hear what's happening in very important state of Florida that could decide this election.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you for the invitation to be here, and to all of the other speakers, people I have admired and followed for a really long time. I'm going to make this super quick. Florida has been in the headlines, I think, every day for the past couple of weeks, with the importance it has in every election, but this election in particular. Florida's elections are won by very, very tight margins. And the Latino vote here is crucial. Our coalition is the largest independent expenditure in the entire state. And so we've been hard at work, working on the Latino vote. all the things that have already been said apply here, except for the fact that the Latino vote in Florida is complicado. It is not a monolith. Depending on where you are in the state, it does different things. And so we have implemented a strategy of speaking to voters in a very nuanced way. It doesn't work here to just translate information from English into Spanish and send out generic ads. That doesn't work here. A lot of the tactics that have been used cycle after cycle, which the reason I think we have seen a lot of apathy from voters in the past and don't come out in the numbers they could, it has a lot to do with the way we speak to them when it's not an election cycle and when it's an election cycle. And so our strategy has been to engage these voters outside of the election cycle for a really long time. And then during the election cycle, really targeted at their specific cultural nuances, the issues they really care about. So things that in Florida really matter to the Latino voter and the way we are talking to them. We have had extreme COVID peaks here. So talking to Latino voters about COVID and how to stay safe and what this means for them when a pandemic is mismanaged. And I'm kind of putting on my scientist hat there. Latinos are hospitalized at 4 times the rate, and they die at 2 times the rate of white Americans from COVID. When it comes to climate change, Latinos in Florida are impacted directly by climate change all the time, from heat waves to sea level rise to hurricanes. We talk to them very directly about that. And more than 65% of Latinos think climate change is a top priority and immediate action needs to be taken. More than 75% have experienced the effects in their own lives. Healthcare is another top issue, and immigration. So we don't treat it as a monolith. We do very targeted conversations with the different groups, depending if they come from Puerto Rico after the hurricane, or they're second generation Cuban, or they're Colombian voters, et cetera. We have all of those very specific conversations. And like Vanessa said, misinformation is a big deal here. Latino voters have been the target of misinformation campaigns here heavily, especially through technology like WhatsApp chats. So we are heavily fighting that and countering all of that through all of our strategies. Another thing that's very important for Latino voters right now that's on our ballot here in Florida is a $15 minimum wage hike. And so those are all the things that we talk to our community about, because as other speakers have said, it's not enough to say your voice is your vote and your vote is your power. What does that mean in terms of my life? What does that mean in terms of how does my vote count? If I vote, what happens to improve my quality of life and to give me more rights? And so we're having those conversations across the state because we know that our Latino vote has been traditionally a low propensity vote, and we are seeking to turn that around in this election cycle. So I'll leave it at that. Our strategy is not only election cycle, but long-term, and we're proud of the work that we have done here across the state. It's a large state, and we'll see how this all works out in November. But we are certainly, maybe not the fastest growing group, but within the electorate, we are the largest ethnic minority right now, and we need to take that power to the polls. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this important charla. We'll be back next week, and we'll let you know what that charla is going to be about. But for right now, let's make sure that we use all these resources that were provided by our charla oradores and oradoras. Please check the chat box, because there's all kinds of links that I saw flying around there. Let's get registered, let's vote, and let's be counted on the census. Thanks. Have a great weekend. We appreciate all of you, and thank you, NBC, Universal, Telemundo, Facebook, Instagram, Friends of the Latino Museum, Mary Center, and of course, everyone that took part in this charla. And we are very, very grateful to MasterCard as well. Thanks, everyone.